right. Board is in session. Welcome to the April 16th budget work session of the Arlington County Board. Last week, our manager presented a totally revised, extremely slimmed down version of his budget. And this is an opportunity for us today to get a little more detail from the manager and his staff and maybe ask some questions. We've got our adoption coming up April 30th. I should be clear to everyone right now, this budget is constantly evolving as the situation with the pandemic is evolving. And even after we adopt it, we assume we're going to continue to be making revisions because the world keeps changing. So with that, I think I will turn it over to our manager, Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the agenda this afternoon, we will going to start off with a summary of what the timeline is for when we'll receive additional revenue information and expenditure information. And then also we're going to walk through a summary of what our neighboring jurisdictions have been doing to balance their budgets. The third area we'll focus on is the impact of the federal legislation for the Coronavirus Relief Act, and then also the status of potential funding under the Community Development Block Grant Program. And then we're going to move on to a proposal we have under the Single Family Borrower Program for forgiveness of that program, and also for a multifamily borrower waiver, which we'll get into more detail. Then the next item we'll have Kelly Tucker from Arlington Economic Development walk us through the small business grant proposal, and then end up with some good news, which is that we've within the last few hours received a contribution from the Arlington Community Foundation towards enhancing the Meals on Wheels program. So we'll finish up with that and then have take any questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Richard Stevenson, our budget director, to start walking us through the first set of material and timeline.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to give the board and the community a little idea of what's next over the next couple months as we finish out fiscal year 2020. I think we talked a little bit about this at the April 6th meeting, but I wanted to just take another few minutes to walk through some of the steps that we're doing internally to monitor, and then when we know certain things, over the next couple months. So we're, management and finance and all the departments are closely monitoring their spending. As we talked about a week and a half ago, where the manager imposed a hiring slowdown. So tomorrow will be the first payroll that will reflect the stay-at-home order and the hiring freeze or slowdown. Earlier this week, our March accounting period closed, so we have 9 months of revenue and expense data. And then moving forward, we get a number of our taxes around the middle of the month. So by mid-May, we'll have meals, transient occupancy tax, and sales tax receipts for the month of March, and that will be the first indicator to us of how our forecasts and the assumptions that we've made for 20 and 21 are actually playing out. We'll have better information on the non-tax impacts, and again, we'll have a couple more payrolls to see what our spend looks like. Again, in early to mid-June, we'll get another batch of tax receipts coming in. By that time, we'll have about 99% of all the personal property, business tangible, and business license taxes in. Those are our second and third largest tax sources. And concurrently, we'll be receiving the real estate tax payments that are due June 15th. So we'll have a pretty good handle on the revenue side of the equation by mid-June. We continue to get more information, revenue and expense, through June and even into the summer, where invoices that come in after July 1st are accrued back. We really don't know how we finish the fiscal year until about mid to late August, which is why we come back to the board in October for closeout, and when the CAFR is presented to you in November. So reporting back to the board, we figured that we'll be providing the board constant updates here coming back in May and June, giving you updates to the forecast that we've made, or if any of the economic conditions change, we'll we'll be coming back to you in the community to tell you how, what we're seeing. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what other jurisdictions are doing. We're in communication. We've talked with Alexandria. We were supposed to have a call with another call with Loudoun yesterday, but with our crazy schedules, we had to postpone that till next week. But by and large, most of the jurisdictions are doing similar things. There's a common focus of maintaining existing programs and retaining current employees. By and large, most jurisdictions are on the doing similar things on the compensation, where there's eliminating or deferring the increases and imposing hiring freezes. On the funding side, from the budgets that were proposed in February and early March, eliminating a lot of the enhancements that were in those budgets, reducing transfer increases to schools, and delaying capital programs, all similar to what the manager is proposed to you last week in his revised proposal. And also jurisdictions are utilizing reserves and fund balances. Different localities have different types of reserves and different policies around those, but almost every jurisdiction, or I think every jurisdiction, is utilizing reserves or fund balance in some way or another. So on the next slide, we're going to take a couple minutes and talk about some external funding that's anticipated. I think everybody's heard about the CARES Act, the federal stimulus package of $2.2 trillion that provides financial aid to governments, businesses, and families. Virginia's allocation is around $3.3 billion. And at this time, the allocation process is a little uncertain. As I understand it, our congressional delegation is working on the distribution process of those dollars that are flowing to the state, so that the dollars could come directly to Arlington as opposed to the pass through from the state. But I think that process is still evolving. Right now, as I understand it, only jurisdictions over 500,000, a population of 500,000, are getting the aid directly from the federal government, and we're trying to change that so Arlington would see that come directly to us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann and CPHD to sort of walk through some of the dollars that are flowing to Arlington for housing and other support.
All right, thank you, Richard. So stimulus funding for housing and community development emergency efforts includes $830,000 in community development block grant CDBG funds, which is comprised of $790,000 for Arlington and $40,000 for the City of Falls Church. In addition, we're estimating an additional $200,000 to $230,000 in community services block grant CSBG funding, which is administered through the state. And we're still waiting for final notification of what that exact amount will be. Using CDBG stimulus funds will require amendment of the county's annual action plan, which also requires approval from HUD. So staff is working on a process now that would allow the county to deploy these funds by late June or early July. Meanwhile, the process for CSBG funding is a little bit different because it is administered by the state. So for those funds, we're hoping to deploy them a little bit earlier. We're hoping that we could administer those resources by late May or early June, depending on the time that the funding amount is announced. In addition, Home Investment Partnerships Program, which is also known as Home Funds, and additional CDBG stimulus funds may be available at a later date. So we're waiting to hear from HUD what additional appropriations the federal government may be making for those sources. And then lastly, a Department of Justice award of approximately $137,000 and other state funds may be allocated as well at a later date. The county is also proposing 2 relief initiatives for borrowers of county loan funds. And we looked at both how we could provide relief for single-family borrowers and also multifamily borrowers. So the first initiative I'm going to talk about is targeting our single-family borrowers. So what this is it would be a loan payment forgiveness option, a temporary one, for single-family borrowers that make monthly payments toward a moderate income purchase assistance program, which is also known as MyPAP, or a home improvement program, which is also known as HIP, that are making monthly payments towards those loans. And the payment forgiveness initiative that we're proposing would be in effect from May 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. So it would be 8 monthly payments total that would be forgiven. These payments would resume on January 1st, 2021. And if approved by the county board, letters would be mailed to eligible borrowers next week with details of the assistance. And borrowers will need to verify that the property is their primary residence in order to participate in the forgiveness program. Next slide. In order to implement this initiative, we are requesting county board authorization as shown in this recommendation. Next slide. So we're also proposing a relief program that would target borrowers of our multifamily loan funds. And these loan funds are used so that multifamily owners can create committed affordable units that are affordable generally to households making 80% of area median income or less. And so we wanted to provide relief to those borrowers as well. So in order to provide temporary financial relief to these multifamily borrowers, we're also proposing what we're calling a limited loan payment waiver initiative. This initiative would allow borrowers of Arlington County multifamily loan funds to waive 2020 annual payments due on these loans in order to address rent and vacancy losses, as well as potential emergency needs associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Multifamily borrowers who have not yet submitted calendar year 2020 residual receipt loan repayments as of April 1st, 2020, could request a limited loan payment waiver in order to address emergency needs at these properties, which may include rental assistance for low-income tenants so they can remain at the property, operating deficits that are a direct result of vacancy and rent losses due to the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, or other emergency needs that are caused by the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Unlike the single-family initiative, waived payments for multifamily borrowers would not be forgiven or even forborne. The county loan would continue to accrue interest on the unpaid balance, including the portion not remitted to the county, as prescribed by the terms in the county loan agreements. Requesting limited loan payment waivers for 2020 loan payments will be optional, and borrowers requesting this waiver will also be required not to evict any low-income tenants for non-payment of rent through December 31st, 2020. Letters will be sent by email to borrowers next week, and staff will return to the county board in May to request approval of limited waiver agreements for borrowers who are interested in participating. So that concludes an overview of the relief programs we're recommending for our borrowers. I'm going to turn it over to Telly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the County Board. I wanted to first thank you for the opportunity to present the Small Business Emergency Grant Program. We first discussed this program in brief last week during the April 6th budget work session, but I wanted to take the opportunity today to provide more context around the program. In response to the unprecedented crisis surrounding COVID-19 and its negative economic impact on the small business and nonprofit community, Arlington Economic Development proposes the Arlington Small Business Emergency Grant. To provide more context, the acronym GRANT we've created stands for Giving Resiliency Assets Near Term. The program is designed to provide immediate relief to Arlington's small businesses. The grant program would provide grants of up to $10,000 to businesses with less than 50 employees. Businesses may use grants for employee salary, benefits, other business, capital, or operating expenses directly related to the immediate impacts of COVID-19. Additionally, the process by which we would use to evaluate grants includes an online application process as well as accepting paper applications. They will be evaluated through a 3-stage competitive process, which will culminate with a review by a diverse panel of community business stakeholders. And I'll share more details about the process momentarily. As with many of our BizLaunch programs that focus on small business, this grant also will have an equity focus, working with many of the partners, organizations that provide small business assistance to engage hard-to-reach populations and entrepreneurs and provide comprehensive services throughout the process. Next slide, please. During the application process, the application will be posted online for a defined period of time. Paper applications will also be accepted via mail. The applications will be translated into multiple languages. During stage 1, the internal staff will look at base eligibility, which will be reviewed to ensure that they meet eligibility criteria, including company size, economic hardship, good standing with Arlington County, as far as business license and taxes. During stage 2, there will be weighted considerations. Internal county working groups will apply a weighted scoring system, considerations to include the number of jobs retained and or supported with the funds, the length of time the business has operated in Arlington, whether it's a whether it's a women and or minority owned business, and the demonstrated need for that business. Also, we will apply considerations for how these businesses plan to use those funds. The process will culminate in a 3rd stage with a grant review panel, a diverse grant review panel, with assistance from independent financial reviewers. This panel will evaluate blind applications, the weighted application data. They'll consider companies' financial resiliency prior to COVID-19, and then make final award recommendations. The review panel will include members of the Economic Development Commission and the Industrial Development Authority, among others. The final stage would be approval and disbursement, which we are requesting that the board consider delegating authority to the county manager to sign off on behalf of the county to approve and disperse funds to the businesses that have been selected through the Industrial Development Authority. The estimated time frame to implement the program is 1 month from the opening of applications to award grants. The timeline could be slightly adjusted depending on the volume of applications received. However, AED will communicate with applicants through each stage of the review process as to the status of their applications. That concludes my presentation today. We're asking the board to consider delegating that authority to the county manager so that we can disperse the funds in an expedient fashion. And then also that the board would acknowledge that the funds that we plan to use would be reappropriated from the previously approved Gazelle grant program to this small business emergency grant program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so Madam Chair, as I opened up the conversation, first off, I do want to thank the Arlington Community Foundation, and they've been doing a fantastic job of reaching out to members of the community and raising funds. We went to the Community Foundation. When I say we, I actually should be more clear about that. We have something called the Arlington Cooperative for a Hunger-Free Arlington, which is which was put together and is being co-managed by Abby Raphael and Diane Kresh with assistance from Arlington Public Schools, and sent in a request to meet the food needs of lower income older adults. The Meals on Wheels program right now could very much benefit from the additional funds. And so the foundation is giving $75,000 to us in the form of the Department of Human Services. And I'm asking that you approve the acceptance of that donation It will allow us to move beyond the current population that we serve. Right now, we serve about 200 people scattered in 4 buildings in the county. That essentially leaves about 700 people who really would qualify, who are not able to get this benefit. So this $75,000 is a first step in addressing that need. So again, I wanted to thank everybody involved in that process for making that happen. And for the final slide, I will turn it back to Richard, who will wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. So the last slide is just showing the calendar through the beginning of the fiscal year. Schools, as I understand, will be proposing their budget tonight. We're having the work session this afternoon, April 16th. We will be holding the public hearings for the budget and taxes and fees next week on April 23rd, with markup with the board on April 27th, and budget adoption following that on April 30th, which is a Thursday. And then the schools will follow in adopting their budget on May 7th. And the fiscal year begins the 1st. So with that, I will put it back to Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. Let's see, Mr. Manager, I believe you need us to vote on a couple of items here, one being the emergency grant for businesses and the other being the $75,000 to beef up, no pun intended, Meals on Wheels. And is that correct that you're asking for that? And then
Yes.
some questions?
I'm asking for that. And also as to the 2 items that Ann Venezia presented, I'm not asking you to approve formal documents with that, but I am asking you to approve the concept of the proposal.
Okay.
One other piece of information, which is that the actual small business grant application forms were posted on the county board website this morning, and there's a board report with that goes with that. It has attachments of the template agreement that would be used in a descriptive detail.
Thank you. All right, colleagues, I don't think we're going to have any particular issues with any of the 3 items that we should be voting on today. So I'd like to propose that we go ahead and get some motions on the table. Take care of that, and then. Excuse me, I've got feedback. I don't know if anybody else does. Anyway, get those on the table and done, and we'll debate questions.
So, Madam
Does
Chair,
that sound all right?
I'd be happy to begin with a motion for the small business grant program.
Please.
And I would, if I think we can go ahead and get this on the table, but I do have a couple of questions to follow up on.
Sure, absolutely.
But the motion itself is that we approve the Arlington Small Business Emergency Grant Agreement, which outlines the disbursement and management terms and conditions of this small business emergency grant, and that we further authorize the county manager or his designee to sign the agreement among Arlington County, the IDA, and the individual businesses that are receiving grants, as described in Exhibit A, which I believe the manager just noted was attached to the board report currently available online.
All right, thank you. And is there a second? All right, motion's been moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to your motion or have some questions?
Sure. Yeah, I thank you, Ms. Garvey, or Chair Garvey. I think, I'm just incredibly enthusiastic about this program. I think it will be really needed. And I think this reflects, as the board report noted, feedback that we got from small businesses that really what is most needed is grants, not additional loans. And I really want to just commend staff for the flexibility and identifying the existing pot of about $765,000 to fund this. I want to, when we first started talking about this last week, Mr. Tucker, you had mentioned as the county manager that we could keep open the possibility of expanding the funding available, whether through the emergency contingent or other sources. And so I wanted to dig in a little bit on that now that we know more about the process for this. So as I look at this rollout, it seems like somewhere between stage 1 and stage 2, for example, we may have some sense of how many applicants meet the base criteria. So, we'll have a sense about how far the existing money is going to stretch, how many generally qualified applicants might otherwise not be receiving funds. it strikes me that that could be a good time to come back with an interim update. And so we could consider adding more funding in time for the initial awards, so that applicants who don't make that first cut wouldn't have to wait for a second round. Could you respond to that, and maybe just, if not, talk a little more about how the process of coming back to consider adding more funds if the number of qualified applicants greatly outstrips the existing funding would go?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Crystal. That's a very astute observation. I think it would be appropriate for us to maintain communication with the board through the process. We don't know initially how many applications we will receive, but we do know we have over 6,000 small businesses in Arlington County. So our plan is to, once the application process is open and we go through the first and second phase of the evaluation process, we certainly can come back to you at one of your future budget work sessions or special called meeting if need be, to provide you some data around how many applicants fell through, and then still how many applicants we do have that meet the base criteria, but that we don't have funds to then award. Similarly, I will mention that we are seeking contributions from other resources and entities as well. We've had discussions with the Industrial Development Authority about contributions to this fund as well. Similarly, I will mention that some of our bids, our business improvement districts, have also expressed interest in possibly contributing at this time. They each need to meet with their respective boards to determine if their budgets allow them to move forward with that. So I think there will be additional information provided to you all in the coming days and weeks. And then similarly, we've heard from over 100 one-on-one consultations and more than 600 responses to business surveys that there are some businesses out there that don't need the maximum $10,000 grant. There are those that really are looking for much smaller amounts, somewhere in the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 amount. And so part of the application process will ask them to detail how much money they need and to encourage them to only apply for the money that they need, so that there will be ample resource for others to apply as well.
Thank you. That's heartening, especially the piece about additional sources. And I think to the extent that we maybe have some employers in Arlington that are less affected by this, who might be interested in joining to support the others in the same ecology that they share here, I think we'd really welcome that. That's helpful, I think, about an interim update, and I think we may just want colleagues to discuss amongst ourselves and the manager. I think what I'd like to avoid, as we've heard some of these tales about small businesses applying for grants, waiting on hold with the Small Business Administration when they know they really need relief urgently. If there is a way that we can bring relief more urgently, rather than just sort of putting a pause on reaching the end of the first go round, trying to identify more funds, and then proceeding with the second, is what I'm aiming at. But it sounds like you're pretty attuned to that already, Mr. Tucker, and I think your staff will be too. So I'd welcome the opportunity to meet as this process starts to unfold, and we have a sense of how many businesses and how much money would qualify for that first cut.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, Mr. Dorsey, Mr. DeFranti, questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I heard?
You are heard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Tucker, in the criteria for the awarding of these grants, I note that the base criteria does not include what is added as an additional consideration, and that is that you are fundamentally disrupted by executive order either 53 or 55 or any other regulations which have limited your operations. So I'm a little curious as to the thought process as to why that wasn't included as a base criterion. One of the things that I'm looking to do, given that we do have limited resources, is to make sure we're really helping people who really can tie the impact to what restrictions have been imposed versus other businesses that have seen a reduction in aggregate demand, which is important and which is meaningful. But if I have to prioritize who I help first, I'm going to want to look to prioritize those other businesses.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. I want to make sure that I do clarify that. I believe in your board attachment, and I'm pulling that up now, in the attachment entitled Arlington Small Business Enterprises Grant Program Process, County Board Work Session, Exhibit 1.
Yes.
In that applicant, I think you will see the last bullet point in stage 1 base criteria does mention that the base criteria is for businesses that can demonstrate a sudden economic hardship due to COVID-19 with at least 35% lost revenue for March 2020. So I apologize maybe if there was a bit of confusion, but that is part of the base criteria.
Well, I'll actually phrase my question a little bit differently because I do appreciate that, but let me give you an example of what I'm thinking of. A restaurant, for example, has had its actions curtailed by the governor. They can no longer serve people inside. A 7-Eleven, for example, can still operate, but they're probably going to experience an extreme loss of revenue tied to COVID-19, not because their operations have changed. It's simply because aggregate demand has decreased. Not to say that they're not all worthy, they are, but it seems like I don't want 7-Eleven jumping ahead of the restaurant who's fundamentally been altered because of restrictions that have been imposed.
Sure, understood. And I do think over the next 2 weeks, which we continue to refine our evaluation criteria, we can continue to add more criteria that further defines which businesses have been affected to the greatest extent. I think part of our comments around businesses that demonstrate need speak to the situation that you've just described. Need due to businesses who were affected by the governor's mandate of less than 10 or few people gathering have been affected in a much greater way than an example such as a convenience store, like you mentioned. And so that should be taken into consideration as part of our evaluation process. So I'll make sure that that is noted and included in our evaluation.
Thank you. I have another similar question along these lines, Madam Chair.
Yep, you've got the floor. Keep going.
And hopefully you have better minds than me that could come up with a way to do this, but it also seems that there should be somehow an assessment of liquidity in determining who gets prioritized for assistance first. And again, I'm thinking of scenarios where if you're all things being equal, you've been affected, you've suffered a revenue loss. If you have a number of expenses that have continued despite the crisis, really resulting in decreased liquidity, that should be factored in your favor against someone who has either been able to defer, delay, or hasn't realized those fixed costs continuing. Is there any is there any way from a financial analysis standpoint that you could look at liquidity and factor that into your grant awards?
Yes, sir. Very good question. In stage 3 of the process, the idea would be for once we've reduced the number of applicants that meet the base criteria and who've met the additional considerations, I think we're going to have to do a deeper dive, if you will, and do more due diligence, which is why we are proposing to have an independent third-party financial reviewer come in. And among those, they will be evaluating, among other things, the financial well-being of the company, its resiliency, its likelihood to continue to survive after the pandemic. And I believe in that analysis, it will include some of the factors that you just alluded to. So I do believe that stage 3 will be a more time-intensive, robust evaluation of each company and applicant on a case-by-case basis, where many of those factors will be considered.
Thank you. And just to underscore, I hate to even have to bring up all of these levels of analysis and prioritization, but it's only due to the fact that we have limited funds, and we do want to make sure that if we don't realize some of the increases that Ms. Crystal alluded to, that we are definitely helping the neediest among the business community first. But I thank you so much for standing up what is a really thoughtful, effective program. Given our resources and given the circumstances, I applaud the effort.
Thank you, sir.
And the speed. I just like to add the speed has been great. Mr. DeFranti. You're on mute, I think. Do you have any questions?
There you go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the questions and I'm broadly supportive of the program for sure. In the staff report on page 2, that you mentioned the categories that would be eligible, and that includes salary and benefits, but it also mentions other business capital, which I certainly could envision being necessary and critical. But I wonder if you, as you were putting this together, if you have any examples. Certainly salaries and benefits are sort of first on my list, but if there is business capital expenditures that would sort of fit with the stages and the standard of review that Mr. Dorsey just outlined, love to know if there are examples or if that's an area you're seeking to further refine.
Sure. So it became very difficult to itemize a list of potential expenditures that every business might incur. And so our intent with creating capital or operating business expenditures was to be a catch-all for businesses who might have unique needs. For example, some businesses have expressed interest in investing in technology that allows them to have a broader online presence or virtual presence to provide or sell their good or service. Other businesses have expressed a need to continue to pay suppliers or to restock inventory during this time. And so we're expecting to see a rather eclectic mix of needs from the business community. I do believe, though, there will be, in the application process, there will be an open-ended question which asks every applicant to describe how they plan to use the funds that are provided should they be awarded. And that evaluation, that criteria, albeit it will be somewhat objective, to Mr. Dorsey's comment earlier, it allows the review panel the opportunity to weigh whether each business plans to use that money responsibly and in a way that gives them the best chance of being resilient even after this pandemic. So it's a very good question, and it will continue to be refined, but I think we will have to evaluate those on a case-by-case basis.
Sure. I guess that works for me. Your examples are helpful. I think you probably heard the general tenor of my question is I'd be leaning towards salaries unless there's a specific example and of where it's critical with online or suppliers or something along those lines. That's the only question I had. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Tucker, I'm so impressed with the speed you put this together and all of the flexibility you're building in, which I think we absolutely have to do because one size will not fit all, particularly with all of these small businesses. I had one question, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this, but I'm just kind of trying to get the lay of the land looking forward and trying to understand it a little bit. What I'm hearing is that one of the issues with the federal CARES and small business loans is that you have to have a relationship with a bank. That wasn't intended, but that's the way it's apparently playing out. So companies that have a relationship with a bank, they're in there, they can get the money easily, whereas the banks aren't even taking requests from companies that don't already have a relationship with them. How does that, I assume we're trying to help those folks that don't have that relationship to help them go, or will they eventually be able to get some money through these banks, or is this something that we need to work actually with our banks to make them allow the money to flow to the businesses from the federal government? So this is fairly complex. I don't need a huge answer, but if you've got any comments right now, that would be helpful for me to know kind of what we're going to be facing moving forward.
Sure. Our BizLaunch team has really stayed engaged and on top of the latest information that's coming out daily through the federal government, through the SBA, and through the banks that are participating providers. One of the things that naturally happens whenever federal grant funds flow through local banks is each bank has evaluation criteria that it uses as a bank. And naturally, any business that has a banking relationship, whether it's a business account, whether it's a loan, whether it's even a personal account, naturally has more information as to the creditworthiness, the status of that business, the revenues it generates, what liquidity they have, how many assets and what liability they have. And so it was, my understanding is that naturally it was easier for banks to work with existing customers and that they were giving preference. We have heard, though, of community banks such as Atlantic Union Bank, which contacted us this week, that said they are additionally meeting with clients who don't have banking relationships and are working with those customers as well. And I believe to date they mentioned that they had awarded 49 different applicants some sort of federal relief through the CARES Act program at this time. One of the additional pieces of information that we received today on a webinar that the SBA is currently unable to accept new applications for the Paycheck Protection Program, the P3 program, as some people refer to, based on the availability of appropriations funding. So what we are understanding is that some of the funding that was appropriated has now been exhausted, which I think underscores the importance of us trying to get this program up and running as well, because there are still many businesses out there in need who have not been successful in their application for federal funding, including those are underrepresented populations who may not have a Social Security number due to their immigrant status. And so many of them still operate businesses and have a valid business license in Arlington, and they would be eligible to apply for funding through our program.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Just a little bit of kind of the context, which is kind of wild. Thank you. All right, I'm ready to vote. Our colleagues, everybody good? All in favor? And I will call the roll call. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Let's see. All in favor say aye, and I'll start as I go on my screen. Down here in the lower left is Mr. Dorsey. Is Crystal?
Aye.
Mr. DeFranti?
Aye.
All right, thank you. I think we're having some connection difficulties because the pictures are going and the sound is a little weird, but I think that motion passed 4-0.
Madam
Yeah.
Chair,
Aye.
one question
Sorry.
before
Aye.
we go.
Yes.
I assume that these applications will be available on the BizLaunch website, AED's website. Would like to confirm that, and when will they be available?
Thank you for the question. Our intent is to have the applications live and open by the first week of May. We're continuing to work with an online platform that will enable us to accept the volume of applications and to secure the data. And so over the next 2 weeks, it allows us to promote the program. There will be a press release immediately after this board meeting that details the website where people can find more information as it's provided and to get real-time updates on when the application goes live.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, any more questions? We'll move to the next motion if we're good. All right. I was thinking next we might take the MyPAP and HIP loan payment forgiveness program. I believe there's a motion on slide 6 to help us with that one. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Sure.
Roger, put up slide 6. There, thank you.
Sure, Madam Chair, I'm happy to make that motion. I move that we authorize the county manager as designee to forgive payment of monthly amortized principal and interest payments between May 1, 2020 and December 31, 2020 for all single-family borrowers under the county's Moderate Income Purchase Assistance Program, MyPAP, and the county's Home Improvement Program on condition that the borrowers are not more than 90 days delinquent on their monthly payments and that they currently occupy as their primary residence the property for which the loan was made, and to take all steps necessary, including those through the county's loan servicer, Amerinat, to implement the loan payment forgiveness.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, motion's been moved and seconded. Mr. DeFranti, would you like to speak to your motion at all?
I think all of us, I just want to note that that it sounds from you, Mr. Manager, as though the steps we're taking on the rental side don't require, in this instance, a specific action. But I know all of us share a lot of concern, and fully, at least for my part, I think we all support the steps you're taking on rental, the targeted steps we're taking that would lead to rental forgiveness in the other slide. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yes, and I don't know, Ann, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I can speak to that. So, for the multifamily relief program that we're proposing, we first want to gauge with borrowers what their interest is in the program. And for borrowers who are interested, we would be asking them to sign a limited waiver agreement, and we would be returning to you all in May for approval of those agreements. And we could speak further about the initiative at that time.
Great. So that there may have been most of the outreach is coming after this with respect to those multifamily borrowers, right?
Correct. So if the board generally approves the concept of the initiative that we're proposing, we would do our outreach after today's meeting and to gauge interest with the borrowers that we're targeting for the multifamily initiative. And then based on the borrowers who are interested in participating, again, we would ask them to sign these limited waiver agreements, which we would return for you all to approve through a May action.
Great. That was the only point I guess the only other point I wanted to make, really appreciate that. Those of so many Arlingtonians follow the federal legislation, and it seems to me that there's, at least the initial stage, it's very important to help homeowners, but the federal legislation seemed to me overweighted slightly towards single family, and I'm glad that we're also pursuing multifamily. So that's all I wanted, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, Ms. Crystal, any questions or comments?
Let me make sure I'm off mute. Can you all hear me? Great.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
So thank you. And I share Mr. Giafranti's interest in the multifamily loan payment program. My chief question was answered well by Ms. Venezia in the program, which is that it will be a condition of those loan payment waivers, multifamily buildings, that the property managers may not evict tenants, which I think is incredibly important. With regard to the MyPAP forgiveness in particular, the slides use the term single family a couple times, and I think that for loan purposes maybe means something different than for land use purposes, because I know a lot of MyPAP borrowers use those funds I think to purchase condos. So that's not a designation of the form of home they're in. It's just a designation that it is one owner. Okay. And then the only other question I had about that wasn't immediately clear from the slide was the loan forgiveness, borrowers need to in some way show or request need. It's not automatic that we're deferring all payments, or is it?
The forgiveness program for our MyPAP and HIP borrowers, we are proposing that it would be all borrowers who make monthly payments. They need to qualify in order to receive the loan funds at the outset. And so borrowers can only earn up to 80% of area median income in order to qualify for these loan funds. And so based on that, we are, and so that we can have some immediacy to the relief, we are extending the forgiveness option to all borrowers who currently make monthly payments.
Okay, and sorry, again, it's an option, or they automatically are enrolled in it?
They would, in the case of the single family, they would automatically be enrolled for this.
I think that's my only question. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey, any questions, comments?
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to follow up from where Ms. Crystal was, because you know what, Ms. Venezia, what you described is certainly needed economically, but it's more stimulus than relief if it's going to capture people who are unaffected from disrupted income or other issues during this time. So my question is largely about the scale of our exposure. Have we priced what that relief is going to cost? And then if you could speak more to why the time period until the end of the year.
Sure, absolutely. So again, speaking for what we refer to as our single family program, which again, Ms. Crystal, as you pointed out, those funds are used also to purchase condos and other forms of ownership homes as well. So for our MyPAP borrowers, so again, that's for home buyers who are using the funds for closing cost and down payment assistance. The average monthly payment for those borrowers is about $57 a month to the county. So for the period of forgiveness that we're talking about, the average benefit for those homeowners would be $454. For the home improvement program, those loans tend to be a little bit higher in terms of their monthly payment, sometimes because the term of loan is shorter. So therefore, they're making bigger payments over a shorter period of time. And so the average monthly payment for those borrowers who are making monthly payments is $227 per month. And so the average benefit for borrowers of that program would be $1,813 for the 8-month period that we're speaking of. So the total cost to the county, if the forgiveness program were to go forward, would be somewhere in the range of $64,000 to $80,000 for the entire forgiveness period.
So for the entire period for both the HIP and MyPAP.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
More questions, Mr. Dorsey?
Yes. So one other concerning the multifamily provisions. And I appreciate that we are going to think about how to structure this so that we prioritize those who are assisting tenants and dealing with other COVID-specific impacts. Question remains, have we discussed whether or not loan payment waivers would be available for any properties that are taking specific actions to improve the resilience, if you will, of their multifamily community to protect its residents from, health issues spreading within those communities? So, in other words, would that be another potential way for people to access this payment waiver if they haven't really suffered any of these other issues, don't require any funds to meet those other needs, but are taking clear steps to improve health within a multifamily community?
So thank you, Mr. Dorsey, for your question. So one of the eligible uses that we identified for using funds as a result of a payment waiver is that they could use those dollars for operating costs that are specifically associated with COVID-19 support. And so if they were to identify that there is a need at the property to do additional cleaning, let's say, of common areas or something else that increases their operating costs as a result of the pandemic that's going on at the moment, that would be an eligible expense that they could use these waived loan funds for.
Okay, appreciate that.
All right, that's it. Thank you. Ms. Venezia, I think the only question I had was, do you have a sense of how many people are going to be affected by this forgiveness program? Because, you've got multifamily dwellings with people in it. You've got single. Do you have a sense of that? How many people we might be able to be helping a bit?
Sure. So our best estimate is that if the limited loan payment waiver initiative were to go forward, the properties, if all borrowers wanted to participate in that program, the waived payment amount would be somewhere in the range of $2.1 to $2.3 million. And so if we estimate an average monthly payment of about $1,500 for households that are benefiting from one of our committed affordable units, we estimate that if all of those funds were used for emergency rental assistance, for instance, that could serve approximately 1,600 households. Again, that's
Great.
one of the uses that we're suggesting properties could use the funds for. Again, there are others, but that's an example of the number of households that could be helped with the money.
Great, thank you. And then I assume we're going to be doing follow-up at the end to find out how the money's been used and all of that. We'll do an after action, but that'll be ways.
Absolutely.
Away. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Oh.
Colleagues, I think we're ready to vote. No, Mr. DiFranti.
Just following up on your question, Madam Chair, did you do a little bit of an assessment on the MyPAP program of how many people would be helped through that? I just think it's always helpful to show scale with the two programs.
Absolutely. So on the for our MyPAP and our HIP borrowers, we have exactly 100 households that would benefit from the forgiveness relief that we're proposing. The balance of the portfolio are all deferred loans, so that's why they wouldn't be part of this forgiveness initiative. Because again, we're targeting those who are making required hard pay monthly payments.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Venencia and Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to vote on this particular motion. Colleagues, we're ready to go?
Yes.
All right, I'll mix it up. I'll just go around by my screen. I'm going clockwise. So all in favor, please say aye. And I'll start with you, Ms. Crystal.
Aye.
All right, Mr. Dorsey.
Aye.
Mr. DeFranti.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey, aye. All right, that motion passes 4-0 as well. Thank you, Ms. Venezia and everybody. Thank you very much. Now, I think we've got one more motion to go that we need to make on the Community Foundation grant to get our Meals on Wheels. Sorry, I beefed up is all I can keep thinking of, and getting to more people. So anybody would like to make a motion on that, and we'll have any questions or discussion.
Sure, Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we accept that very
Thank you.
generous contribution.
That's a difficult one. I'll second it. How's that? Great. Thank you. Mr. Dorsey, would you like to speak to your motion?
Not much to say other than this is a great way of community helping community, and being able to scale up this program to serve even more people is exactly what is needed at this time. And it's just a wonderful testament of how we can all come together, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
Thank you, Community Foundation.
Yes, and everybody. Anybody else? Comments, questions?
Just credit to you.
Crystal?
I know you, Madam Chair, have really been pushing on this type of approach for often our seniors. And if you've done Meals on Wheels once, you never forget it. And so just to thank you to you, fully support.
Oh, heavens. I think the thank you is going to go to staff, which is where I was going to end up. Ms. Crystal, anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about this as well, and I think it hits a couple of notes that are worth spotlighting. The first is just how much we appreciate everything the Community Foundation is doing in general, in coordinating the gifts of not only individual residents, but also corporate residents of this community who wish to be part of addressing some of the greatest needs resulting from the pandemic and social distancing. But the second point is just that I'm really glad to see this kind of strategic move to address food distribution, which has been one of the absolute top priorities for county government. I know for us on the board, and for a lot of other leaders in our community. And so I'm really glad to see this as a targeted way to pretty dramatically expand the number of seniors for whom we might be expected to be at much higher risk of trying to collect food for themselves without it. And I know that we're taking similar approaches to kind of tactically address the needs for kids and families in our communities and other populations that may be high need. And I know Mr. DeFranti and I are looking forward to welcoming the two co-chairs of that new cooperative for Hunger-Free Arlington, Diane Kresh and Abby Raphael, to the town hall tomorrow at noon. So we hope folks will join us on Facebook. We're looking forward to hearing more from them.
Absolutely, and we'll have this item to celebrate. So I just want to thank, I think staff's been working actually all day to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's dotted and make sure we could move forward and vote on this today. And I'm feeling with all of these items that we've had, the theme is the speed with which they've been brought together to us. And also the adaptability and trying to innovate, if you will, on the fly, which is what really this particular emergency calls for. And I just want to thank everybody because it's not easy to be doing these things as fast as we've been doing them and turning them around, and really needed and just great. So thank you to all the staff. Hats off to all of you for what you've been doing. I think we will move to see if there are any questions about Mr. Schwartz's presentation, anything more on the budget. But Mr. Schwartz, I'd like to see if you've got any more comments you'd like to make before I open it up to questions from my colleagues, if they have any more about your budget that's we're hoping to vote on the 30th.
Sure. I just wanted to check. Did you all vote on accepting the grant?
I think we did we? Or did we not? No, we didn't. So thank you for getting your chair in line. You know, this is what the chair is supposed to do. Thank you. We've been doing them. All right. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. And going clockwise, I'll start with Ms. Crystal.
Aye.
All right. Mr. Dorsey.
Aye.
Okay. Mr. DeFranti.
Aye.
All right. Great. And Ms. Garvey, aye. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Anything else we can do for you?
No, as to the question that you raised. At this point, we are continuing to take, we've received some comments from the public. We have both the tax rate and budget hearing coming up next week on the 23rd, as Mr. Stevenson mentioned. And we are spending a fair amount of time working through some proposals on how to fund nonprofits and to further expand on the work that we've done. We did initially where we provided funds out of my contingent to the Arlington Food Assistance Center. So there's a lot of work going on there. And as you know, because we brief you regularly, there's an enormous amount of work going on generally related to COVID, but the county is still, performing all of its major functions. And so we're happy to take any questions you might have on the broader budget or specifically on the items I just mentioned.
Thank you. All right, I'll see if any of my colleagues have any questions. Mr. DeFranti, I'll start with you. Do you have any questions for our staff about the current budget? Not necessarily. We do have a markup session. I should let people know. I think it's on the 27th, so that'll be we'll come together once more after the public hearing to talk about the budget. But do you have any questions for now?
No. Well, I did want to just make one note. I just want to thank the manager for his comments with respect to nonprofits. Just to update everyone, I think I mentioned this last week, but direct service providers, I was glad that we made the step with respect to employees. There's been I had an email back and forth with the manager on that, and just over the coming week, I would certainly want to make sure that staff has the time, as they're doing so many things, to get those steps all set. But I certainly think that we want to align some of our nonprofit service providers, homeless service providers, others, with their first responders in some cases too. So just incremental progress. Thank you to the manager and staff on that. And I'm hopeful, my sense is over the coming week, staff is likely to get there. Is that a fair question, Mr. Manager?
Yes, and actually I'm going to ask Ms. Cowan, I know she's on the call, and Anita Friedman is here to just give you a little bit of a sense of the process that we're going through with that.
Sure, yeah, it's Michelle. So yes, we are working through that process, and we are trying to, just like we did for the employee pay premium, while certainly the direct care providers in the homeless services area are super important, we also have a variety of other nonprofits or contractors in the human services area, whether it's home health aides, right, for aging, or contractors who help DD, developmentally disabled clients. And so working with DHS to make sure that we have whether it's a phased process or all at once, make sure that we're treating everyone, if you will, uniformly or fairly, given that yes, there's certainly direct exposure at the homeless service centers and those services, but in other areas where we're providing direct services. So I think we'll be able to come back to you next week on that.
Great. Thank you. I think Human Services, Ms. Friedman and Ms. Cowan, and I know you guys have been working so hard. So I try not to actually email you, Ms. Friedman, because I want to let you do your great work. Thanks to everybody.
You can email me anytime, man. I answer the emails day or night. But I just want to let you know that we have, I have been having a weekly call with all of the safety net nonprofits, facilitated with the Arlington Community Foundation, and also Jennifer Daniels from CPHG was on the call this week. Abby Raphael was on the call this week. We have regular updates also from Lisa Fikes from Volunteer Arlington. I'm pleased to say that we are working very much to maximize our communal resources. I've been also having a call every 2 weeks, I think, with faith leaders, facilitated by Andrew Schneider from Thrive. Because the churches also are pooling resources together for support of the clients. And today we also had a very good call with APS social workers, our social workers connecting with APS social workers to facilitate assistance to the families that are more closely connected to schools and may not feel comfortable coming to our department. So there's more work to come in that area, but one thing that the crisis has done is brought us all closer together.
Great. Thank you so much for all you're doing with all the different parts of our community that are stepping forward and leaning in to try and help each other.
Great, thank you. Mr. Dorsey, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One question, one comment. So the question concerns the community action plan that is on the agenda for our April meeting. It does not include estimates of the CARES Act stimulus revenues within that, correct?
I can speak to that. Mr. Dorsey, that is correct. The action plan that is going forward this month is to authorize funding awards for fiscal year 2021 funds that the county was already receiving.
So
it does not include the stimulus money.
Right. So will the stimulus money be required to be spent in accord with our amended action plan, or will there be greater flexibility provided the locality?
So HUD is providing greater flexibility with the use of the stimulus funds. However, once we identify specifically how we would like to use those dollars, we will need to return to the county board to amend the action plan further.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Yep. I foresee a lot of amendments in our future, Mr. Dorsey, colleagues.
Well, and that just leads to my end comment. As much as I would love to talk about all things budget at this time, I want to just remind myself and everyone else that a big part of our budget is going to be impacted by decisions or proposals that are made that are going to happen, I guess, subsequent to this meeting when APS deliberates over their piece. So I anxiously await that missing piece of the puzzle.
Yep. And a lot of future federal changes coming up as well. Ms. Crystal, any questions, comments you'd like to make?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I do have just one question as I reviewed the memo that effectively summarizes the manager's proposals to better adapt our budget to the reality of pretty dramatically changed revenues. And again, just want to echo, if I haven't enough, how much I appreciate the excellent work that the Department of Management and Finance has done in recent weeks. I agree 100% with Mr. Dorsey that this is going to evolve further and require further reaction and iteration. But I'm also just really impressed at how hard this team has worked to give us something that is not actually just anchored in best guesses, but in a pretty decent survey of past experiences in the county, what our regional partners are doing, and other modeling. So really appreciate the thoughtfulness that undergirds this proposal. So I wanted to ask one question, and this is about revenue estimates. We've talked, and I know we heard a pretty good summary of some of the impacts. We'll know more to meals tax, sales tax, TOT. But there's a note on page 5 at the bottom about real estate tax revenue, which is that we're forecasting real estate tax assumptions related to the growth of our real estate assessment tax base in January 2021. So can you all just say a little more? I know there's always this sort of complicated dance because our assessments are on a calendar year, but our budget is on a fiscal year. But a little more about what we think the drivers of those decreased, I imagine, assessments are in calendar 2021, and how we reach that number.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Stevenson and Ms. Meredith to take the first crack at that question.
Okay, I'll take the first crack. I missed part of the beginning of your question, so let me give you an answer, and then if it's not what you asked, you can re-ask the question. So,
and if it is, then I'll have learned that there was way too much preamble to my questions, which is probably true.
We had assumed in the February budget that assessment growth would increase 3% next January. Okay, which impacts the June payment affecting the 2021 budget. Talking to other jurisdictions, looking, not knowing how this economic and health impact is going to affect assessments, we pulled the assumption back from about 3% to flat. We ran a bunch of scenarios with going negative on real estate. It created a huge hole in the funding side of the equation. We really don't know. We've talked at length to some other jurisdictions about, assessment methodology, what they were looking at. There's so many different factors. And so we just sort of for now taking the prudent course, we just pulled back any growth, and we're going to have to continually talk to economic development and real estate assessments and, our external partners to figure out, how assessments may be impacted. I don't want to belabor this, but, on the commercial side, when we do next January's assessment, it will be based on their revenue and expenses of calendar year 19. There's this lag, right, in the data used. So, all the stuff that's happening now for commercial properties won't actually impact us on an assessment basis until fiscal year 22.
Okay, so when that assumption, best educated guess of no growth, when you all made that determination, that is based pretty much exclusively then on the residential side.
We're figuring there will be some impacts on the commercial side, and there will be some slowdown of sales here in the spring. We've made adjustments to recordation tax and grantor's tax for this transactional side. However, there are still transactions happening, which will set market value. So, that's there are a lot of factors. We could get all the rates and all that on the commercial side, but we looked at a lot of the different factors that could potentially affect assessments and talked to a bunch of people, and we just made the assumption that let's just go for flat assumption growth right now.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I know you guys don't have a crystal ball, but I think even just you're taking the time to unpack a little bit the thinking and when we can see impacts in different sectors of our real estate market is helpful. So I appreciate you taking the time to share it.
All right. Any other questions or comments for our staff from my colleagues? All right. I think we're good. I'd like to just say a couple of things. One, maybe when this is all over, we can put out a how-to manual, how to do a budget when you don't know your revenues and you don't know your expenditures, and a budget that actually makes some sense. I'm really impressed. Thank you. As I said, I think there are a lot of amendments in our future. For those who are watching, I'd like to let you know we have a few changes coming up. This Saturday's meeting, the 18th, we are going to meet virtually very briefly, and then we are going to postpone all of the meeting items for a week so that our April board meeting will be held. Actually, our regular board meeting will be held on Saturday, April 25th, and the carryover meeting will be held on the 21st. No, wait, 25th, 28th. Sorry. So everything is being moved ahead a week. This is because we fully expect the Virginia legislature to, on the 22nd, approve some legislation that will allow us to meet virtually on all of the business that we need to do. And we just decided it made sense for everybody's health and safety and everything else to just wait a week and take everything up a week later. So that is our plan. Again, we've got, let me just make sure I get these dates right coming up. We've got our tax and budget hearing for people who are interested on the 23rd. We'll have lots of, we'll have virtual ways for people to participate. And then we will have our markup session on April 27th and our adoption on the 30th. And again, I expect we're going to be having lots of amendment sessions and changes and adaptions as we go forward. But I'm really impressed with the flexibility of this organization and the speed with which we are adapting to everything, and want to thank everyone because this is not easy to do, I know. Any further comments for the good of the order anyone would like to make? Anything I forgot to cover?
Madam
All
Chair.
right.
Madam Chair,
Mr.
at the risk of ending on a sour note, I did want to let you know we will be posting information. We just received the latest unemployment information for the county. And just to put it in perspective, on March 14th, Arlington, we had 19 unemployment claims. March 21st, we had 849 that week. March 28th, we had 1,752. April 4th, we had 2,484, and for the most recent week, an additional 1,897. So we will post that information and also the breakouts of where that's happening. So I just wanted to get that to you all before you adjourned.
Thank you. Well, it's important information. Anybody who's wondering why we're spending so much time on our safety net programs and doing everything we can to support our nonprofits, that's one of the really good indications as to why. So thank you for that. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. See you all Saturday briefly. Thank you.